Your taxes are paying for 2 current wars and 1 potential future war. Meanwhile, the southern border is in chaos and migrants flood America. Who benefits then on excessive availability of cheap labor? Rather than focusing on migrants themselves, let's focus on who's benefiting from an open border while your resources are spent on war. Hello there, you Awakening Wonders. Thanks for joining us on our voyage to truth and freedom. Remember, click the link in the description, become an awakened wonder. We make additional content every week. You can join us live for interviews with brilliant and influential thinkers. Furthermore, you'll be participating in something grand and glorious as the world around us seems to be deteriorating. Take this complex story that we're covering today. Congress has just granted $95 billion of aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, curiously, in order to ensure that those nations are able to support interests that apparently, evidently, and obviously align with the US establishment's agenda. But do they align with your agenda? And do you remember being asked about these issues? Because all the while, your taxes are being spent on funding foreign military adventures of a variety of hues, the southern border crisis continues, with hundreds of thousands of people from Latin America primarily making it into your nation. And why is it that this crisis is framed in a very particular way? Why is it that there is not more expenditure on securing the border? And who benefits from this migration crisis continuing? Could it be possible that some of the largest brands in America, some of the most recognizable names in American corporate life, benefit from crushing your ability to earn fair wages from your work by flooding the market with cheaply available labor? And what amount of lobbying goes on to ensure that the border crisis goes unaddressed, that wars continue, and that you pay high taxes and yet remain poor and potentially unable to negotiate for better wages? So who's causing the wars? Who's causing the border crisis? And why are ordinary Americans being punished for both? Firstly, let's look at Congress passing a new $95 billion aid package that ultimately will be used to perpetuate unwinnable wars.
The bill is passed.
And that's that. We didn't need to ask you or anybody else. The bill is passed. Just so sort of confident. Like, who actually wants this bill passed? Do you reckon if they did a referendum of everyone in America, it would pass? I don't think so.
After months of delays in GOP infighting, the U.S. House voting Saturday to provide $95 billion to allies abroad. A major win for the White House and Speaker Mike Johnson. In a rare move, Democrats crossing the aisle to help Republicans clear a series of foreign assistance bills.
Oh, hey, peace and harmony around the world. Democrats and Republicans skipping through the fields hand in hand, while ordinary people are funding all of this stuff. And it's likely that they voted not with their consciences, but with their pockets.
The package would provide $61 billion to help Ukraine fight Russia, $26 billion for Israel just days after Iran attacked the Jewish nation, and $8 billion for the Indo-Pacific, where the rise of China has national security experts worried. A fourth bill bans TikTok if its Chinese owner doesn't divest.
We've also... Okay, so keep that war going with Russia. Oh, good. Okay, continue action in the Middle East that looks like it's going to lead to Armageddon. Okay, good. And start a war with China, potentially, because they're not allowed their own country and agenda. Also, though, get rid of TikTok. What? What is this bill? The do what you want bill? Also, Mike Johnson gets to parade around in a glittery wheelbarrow and gets sprinkled with stimulants and drugs.
And changes some foreign assistance into a loan, an idea first floated by former President Donald Trump.
On one hand, $95 billion of additional aid derived from your taxes heading out of the United States of America. Who's heading in to the United States of America?
Today, the border crisis was dumped on Southern California's doorstep at the hands of the federal government. Border Patrol mass released hundreds of illegal immigrants to San Diego's streets as bus after bus arrived at a local transit station, releasing masses of men and women from around the globe.
Men and women, weird sort of categories and stuff. Now, just so you know, I'm sympathetic to people that are struggling around the world, likely in part because of the imperialist behaviors of countries like yours and countries like mine. And it's not us, is it? It's corporatist, globalist projects that are destabilizing the world. But at some point, we have to focus on what is the impact of this migration on ordinary Americans, many of whom might have been a generation or two back from Venezuela or Mexico or Guatemala or wherever. Who's benefiting not only from this influx of migrant labor, but from the ongoing vilification of the migrants themselves, rather than the very powerful forces that are benefiting?
Who had crossed the California border illegally. and they plan to travel to blue cities across America.
¿A dónde vas en los Estados Unidos?
Nueva York.
New York, going to New York.
Atlanta.
Atlanta.
New Jersey.
New Jersey.
Chicago.
Chicago.
New York.
New York.
Sort of like the draft, in a way, but it's a migrant draft. I'm going to the Buffalo Bills. Dolphins. Good luck in Florida.
After release, nonprofit volunteers helped direct the migrants to private buses that took them to the airport and other transit stations. Some decided not to wait and crammed into taxis. Most told us they're here to work.
Okay, so who benefits from cheaply available labour? Well, I suppose it could be giant corporations that are always telling you how American they are and how much they love America and American people. No, that would be really hypocritical.
All right, meat giant Tyson laying off 1,200 workers after closing its pork factory in Perry, Iowa, only later to announce 52,000 jobs for migrants.
We could sack Americans who are expensive and employ poor people from around the world because we care about them. That's why this certainly isn't about our bottom line. Let's look at how very powerful interests benefit from migration and therefore from the border not being correctly policed or patrolled. And perhaps this is why your tax dollars are being spent on foreign wars rather than domestic solutions that might be beneficial for ordinary Americans. A record surge of illegal border crossings in recent years has fueled the debate over immigration and border security, emerging as a key voter concern ahead of the US presidential election in November. And this is some reporting by Li Fang. When the meatpacking giant Tyson Foods announced plans last month to shutter its pork plant in Perry, Iowa, and lay off all 1,200 employees, it brought rare attention to one of the most influential, less scrutinized dynamics of America's mass migration debate. That is, the role played by large politically connected corporations seeking to blunt wage growth. It's interesting that this is a dynamic that's not often scrutinized. Who benefits from no one scrutinizing this dynamic? I.e., who benefits from migration? Of course, we're all focusing on the migrants themselves. Yeah, they're coming over here, getting our jobs.
They took our jobs. Yeah, they're down.
But why is this issue not being addressed differently? For this isn't a time of crisis for Tyson. The same day the company made the announcement, Bloomberg News quoted Garrett Dolan, an executive, as saying that the firm had been actively recruiting from the waves of migrants who have ended up in cities such as New York seeking asylum. Hey, we've got a lovely partner today. It's our friends at Hallow. Hallow is the #1 prayer app in the world. I use it. You can explore Christianity with over 10,000 prayers, meditations, and music. And as Lent continues, what better way to deepen your connection to the loving Lord Christ? It's been downloaded 4 million times in 150 countries. Be like Calm or Headspace, but for Christians. Hallow helps you pray and meditate and sleep better. It's helped me build a daily routine of habit and prayer. I do the rosary. I know it off by heart, except the end bit. I've got to learn that. You can pray alongside Mark Wahlberg, Jim Caviezel. He was Jesus. Jonathan Rumi. He was Jesus in The Chosen. You can choose your own Jesus. What version of Christianity do you want? And you know Jonathan Rumi was my body double in Ballers. Jesus was my body double. Download it today. Reclaim your rightful peace and grow closer to God. Go to hallow.com/brand to try the Hallow prayer app. You will love it. Okay, let's get back to the content. Tyson Foods, which already employs some 42,000 immigrants, which seems like a very high number. I hope they ain't got the Stars and Stripes anywhere on their packaging. Said it had placed some of the migrants to work at its plants in Tennessee. We would like to employ another 42,000 if we could find them, Dolan said. The dual headlines caused a storm on social media, with many calling for a boycott over claims that the company was replacing Americans with immigrants who would work for less. Replacement theory? No, that's very controversial. But they are replacing Americans with migrants. That can't be a replacement theory, can it? Ohio Senator J.D. Vance described the company's actions as the decimation of the American dream. Tyson Foods is far from alone in acting in this way. Many corporations have called for increased immigration as a solution for rapidly rising wages. And several business groups are also pressing policymakers to support programs to extend legal protections to those who entered the country without documentation. Any pro-immigration policies that would be implemented will benefit us on increasing the availability of labour throughout the country, said Andrew Masterman, the former head of Brightview, the nation's largest commercial landscaping company, when pressed by investors 2 years ago on how he would respond to upward wage inflation. I suppose if there is cheaply available labour, then how are ordinary Americans that work in blue-collar or working-class fields able to negotiate for higher wages? It's just simply supply and demand. And that's whether that's immigrant labour that exists in the country or whether it's guest immigrant labour coming in. He added, according to a transcript of his remarks, "We're fans of that. This week's special guest, migrant labour. It's these guys who have been themselves displaced by the interests of globalist capitalists. Hello, we come here to work." It's like a game show, but that game is your life. In 2022, Scott Salmiers, the president of ABM Industries, a nationwide building maintenance and janitorial firm, raised similar concerns on an earning call. "The labour pressures we are currently experiencing are largely unprecedented," said Salmiers. He cited reduced immigration, historically low unemployment, and sudden demand from an economy in rebound for raising wages. It's a direct result of the pandemic. The closure of the border and reduction in foreign worker visas has led to a tight labour market and the most rapid wage increases seen in a generation, particularly among the low paid. The current numbers at the border, therefore, while a political nightmare, pose an economic opportunity to business interests, and corporate interests have not sat idly by. They've started marshalling their resources to lobby Washington for change, especially on immigration policy. Wow, so corporate interests are actively lobbying for a change in migration policy. This brings to the forefront an important principle. Circumstances that may be pejorative and terrible for you, punitive and punishing, might be beneficial to powerful elites. For example, during lockdown, many people in low-paid jobs were suffering, and yet billionaires saw a massive increase in wealth. We don't live in the same world, so the fact that we have the same government seems a bit odd. And who do those governments work for? Is it ordinary people, or is it to advance the interests of these powerful establishment elites? Why don't you let me know in the chat and the comments? The Business Roundtable and the US Chamber of Commerce, the influential lobby groups that helped mobilize support for the 2017 Trump corporate tax cuts, have turned to immigration reform to confront labor market dynamics. In meetings with Congress, the BRT has promoted its agenda of increased agricultural worker visas and temporary protected status, TPS programs, the latter of which grants certain asylum-seeking migrants the legal right to work in the United States. The Chamber, meanwhile, backs the legislation known as HR 16, which gives long-term recipients of TPS the ability to obtain permanent resident status. It's odd that the same lobby group that helped Trump get some tax loophole stuff passed are now working on getting migrant visas more easily obtainable. It makes you wonder where these elite interests actually lie. Do they care about patriotism and MAGA and stuff like that? Or are there a set of corporate interests that sort of migrate all over Washington and all over the corporate map as the actual parasites, the actual aliens, the actual dominant force hovering above your life, parasitically and vampirically hoovering up your resources? While many refugees and asylum seekers are fleeing genuine disasters and oppression, others are seeking better jobs, a dynamic welcomed by major employers, especially those in agriculture, food services, slaughterhouses, janitorial work, construction, and landscaping. BRT, that's the Business Roundtable, represents the chief executives of the largest businesses in America, and its board includes many firms reliant on low-wage labor, including McDonald's, PepsiCo, Walmart, and Yum brands. It's weird, isn't it? These are brands that we've all heard of. It's not like sort of obscure stuff. I hadn't really heard of Tyson Foods, but McDonald's, Pepsi, these are sort of all American brands, aren't they? That sort of are part of every parade and part of every Olympics and very much pride themselves on their connection to America. And what is America other than the American people? Well, it looks like they are actively seeking opportunities to undermine American workers in the labor force before we even get into the nutritional benefits of their products when it comes to the crunch time. And you won't be crunching that hard because your teeth will be rotting and your gastric system will be being annihilated. Donnie King, the CEO of Tyson Foods, is also a member. This is too much like Don King and Mike Tyson. It's a confusing story. Tyson Foods are having a fight with Evander Holyfield Foods, but they bit a little bit of their ear off and it ended up in a sausage. You can finish that. Meanwhile, Suzanne Clark, the president of the chamber, has cited wage growth as a top concern for her business members and has previously called for a doubling of the rate of legal immigration. Business lobbyists were quick to hail President Biden's decision last year to extend TPS protections for over 470,000 Venezuelan migrants, and the administration has since announced an extension for programs granted to nationals of El Salvador, Honduras, Nepal, and Nicaragua. They're always like pretending, we gotta help these immigrants. These poor guys, it's a shame. You know that Trump wanted to put them babies in some cages? Didn't Obama build those cages? Yeah, but Trump wanted to build a wall. But aren't you still building that wall? Look, shut up. We need cheap labor for McDonald's and Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield Foods, as well as PepsiCo. And we also would like to feel very kind while we're benefiting from that. God bless McAmerica. Business groups with a financial stake in immigration policy are also deeply entwined with a pro-immigration activist base. The National Immigration Forum and the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, are prominent examples of this relationship. Tyson Foods was among the sponsors of LULAC's February legislative conference, which focused partly on the need to pass greater immigration protections to migrants. The event featured recorded messages from several Democratic lawmakers and a speech from Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra. The National Immigration Forum, which has organised coalition efforts to expand TPS programs and other immigration reforms, similarly received financial support last year from Amazon, Tyson Foods, Walmart, the BRT, the Chamber, and Marek, a construction firm. Some pretty powerful American corporations here. Amazon, Walmart. I know in fact, from the way that Amazon treat their workers across the world, that their primary concern is not, are immigrants all right? What their primary concern is, can we pay people the minimum amount possible without it being seen as so disgusting that our business model is affected? That seems to be the way that these things operate. Tyson Foods in-house lobbyist Nora Venegas is also active in several immigration reform groups. Tyson Foods supports bipartisan immigration policy solutions. It's trying to make that like it's all friendly. What it's saying is, we don't care which party is in power as long as the party that is in power supports us and not American people. And we have massive plans to employ the world's poorest people and keep them poor. And should they be able to stay in America through changing their visas, then they'll become the generation that we'll be shafting next year, the next generation, with migrants from some other place that we've torn up in a war or by exploiting their resources. Do you see that we have more in common with one another, no matter where we're from in the world, than we do with this set of interests that manipulate behind the scenes law, legislation, migration status, leaving borders open, putting warfare aid over here, all the while telling us we're doing this for kindness. Why are you in that war in Ukraine? Kindness, Israel? Kindness? Why are you letting all these migrants in? Kindness? Bloody hell, you're so kind, we're probably all going to be dead soon. Tyson Foods supports bipartisan immigration policy solutions, said Vega at a press conference with other immigration reform leaders in 2021. Look at the language here, bipartisan leaders. These are all just a bunch of people exploiting ordinary Americans and trying to pretend it's kindness. Whether our team members came as refugees or temporary protected status TPS holders, we support policy solutions to provide them stability, she added. It's about their stability. Just don't worry about Tyson Foods and our profits and the fact that we sacked a load of American workers and then employed a load of migrants. Are these migrants stable? Well, no, because there's a bunch of wars and exploitative activity and coups and CIA deep state activity going on in their country. They're not stable, but also though they are willing to work for pennies on the dollar, so let's just keep that little wheel turning, shall we? Meanwhile, Tent Partnership for Refugees, a new group connecting migrants with employers, has formed alliances with dozens of employers around the world, including Brightview, Amazon and Walmart. And they'll be patting themselves on the back for this. We've got this new initiative. We're helping migrants from pretty war-torn nations. Not only do they want the profit, they want you to love them as well. Tyson Foods, in a Tent press release, announced it would hire 2,500 refugees. Brilliant. This is sort of a bit like Schindler's List, but with Schindler sort of making a load of money out of it and then not letting anyone go. The Tyson Foods scandal eventually blew out. The company said its executive misspoke and denied any wrongdoing, while parts of the press downplayed the issue. It's not really news that Tyson hires many immigrant workers, scoffed the Washington Post fact-checker Glenn Kessler. Salon claimed those voicing concerns about corporations replacing Americans with foreign workers were spinning a narrative akin to a racist conspiracy. Like, what? You got a theory that we're replacing Americans with migrants? I don't think so. Also, Americans, that term should include Muslim, black, gay, Americans of all colours and hues and cultural perspectives being replaced with cheaper labour. They'd like to divide it up and, hey, you're supporting white Americans, you MAGA lunatic, against these beautiful, brown, easily affordable migrants and want us to believe that they're there helping them. How long are you going to continue to participate in that game? Tyson Foods also moved to counter its critics. The company released a statement to Fox News clearing up misinformation about its hiring practices. Any insinuation that we would cut American jobs to hire immigrant workers is completely false, even though we actually did that. This is misinformation. Just because we did replace a lot of American workers with migrant workers, you can't say we did that, or it's misinformation. And in fact, you're the racist, huh? Not us at Tyson Food. No wonder they have to create these categories of discussing stuff makes you racist, because that's the only way they can stop you discussing stuff. Isn't that the most perfect example of misinformation, or I think it's actually malinformation? Something that's true, but they'd prefer you didn't say. But you did sack a load of American workers and then replace them with migrants. Yeah, but that doesn't make us look very good, so it's illegal for you to say that. Oh. While it's true that the company's reported recruitment efforts are centered on those with legal authorization to work, such as TPS holders, many did not enter the country legally, so they were at some point illegal immigrants. And many of the refugees who entered the country without documentation later gained legal status through the focused activism of business-funded immigration advocacy groups and business lobbying from interests such as Tyson Foods. The company is far from a bystander in the process. Just because we've been lobbying to change these laws and then these laws changed and then we benefited from the change in those laws, you think we're somehow involved. That's misinformation. And also, just to make clear, I'm nothing to do with Mike Tyson. And here's my colleague Donnie King. That's true, he's nothing to do with it. A lot of the anti-Trump rhetoric is, this racist son of a bitch, Trump, he won't let any migrants into the country. But we, the Democrats, will do that because we are God-fearing humanitarians who love human beings and people. But then you find out that the Democrats are being lobbied by some of the richest, most powerful corporations to let migrants into the company to lower the wages for their corporation. You yourself have to ask yourself this question. Do you think the Democrats are allowing the border crisis to continue because, as they say, they love human beings and they want to help human beings? Or do you think it's somehow connected to all this lobbying money that's being spent on getting them to change legislation in order to lower wages? So are they doing it because they love human beings, or are they doing it because they love money? And if it is because they love human beings, maybe they'll pass a bunch of laws banning lobbying and not accept any lobbying money from BRT. That will show us for sure, wouldn't it? But as long as they continue to accept that lobbying money, at least part of it, I'm sure it's mostly, they love human beings and the poorer the better and all that. They're certainly trying to make your country poorer and my country poorer and people all over the world poorer. It seems to be a big part of their deal at the moment. You will own nothing and you will be happy. Where did I hear that? But you have to at least consider that the lobbying might be a part of it. Don't you? I mean, I'm certainly considering it. And these vested interests are just one part of what constitutes a persistent oversight and discussion of mass migration. The role of the business lobby in shaping both migration law and the policies that some argue continue to attract those making the journey illegally. As is so often the case, the net result is the relegation of the lowest rungs of America's working class to an afterthought, crushed beneath the imperatives of America's biggest corporations. Sounded somewhat resonant, that, didn't it? Because when you look at the gala and carnival of American political life, the perpetuation of wars that cost tax dollars, the denigration of ordinary Americans, the influx of cheap labor, you have to ask, do I, knowing what I know about these people and these institutions and their practices and their susceptibility to lobbying and where they get their donations from and how they spend their money and how they censor information online and how they want to crush dissent, do I think that their interests are helping people or enriching themselves and ensuring that ordinary people have no power, even if they don't even have the power to nourish themselves or think straight or unify with people of all cultures and colours and religions to oppose this establishment narrative? I'm beginning to think that the Democrats leave the border open and fund foreign wars because they want you poor and unable to compete in the job market. They want you to own nothing and be happy. Pretty catchy slogan. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think in the comments in the chat? Remember, we do an exclusive video every week that you can see, as well as joining us for interviews with brilliant guests, and meditating and learning about spirituality. It's a pretty good offering at a pretty important time. More important than any of that, if you can, please stay free.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.